I've made you a co-host, Kathy, so we're both hosts.
Okay, so I will, seeing that we have a quorum, this is the February 3rd meeting of the Finance Committee. And my first order of business, since we're conducting this virtually, is to make sure the members can hear and we can hear them. So I will just read off the names as I see them on my screen. Sam,
Present.
Kathy's here, Lynn,
Present.
Anna,
Present.
and Counselor Brevick.
Present.
And Tom Porter down in the bottom. There's Tom.
Present.
So I think you've all seen the agenda, but maybe I didn't queue it up, Sean, to be able to show it. But we have a series of information. What's the balance? How does this work? Requests that we made to the finance department. So the first up, I'm just going to go through all of this. I am opening up for public comments. First is stabilization funds. How do they work? What is the function of them and the balances? We had a outstanding request from last fall, which was I glad for. What is the ambulance fund? Again, how does it work and how much does it have? To come back and look at the budget calendar again, and that's a general discussion about things like, are we going to get a midpoint reestimate? So the things Sean has been working on now, particularly that the governor's come out with some budgets issues. And then the Anna had also, underneath that number 5, Anna had asked that we consider whether we want to have any early meetings before May with departments. So she can talk about what she has in mind and we can have a discussion. And so this February budget update is all in that. Then the agenda for the next Finance Committee meeting, I wanted to see whether it would be all right with people to switch it from the 17th to the 24th. And that's a timing so that we're anticipating the council will get financial orders and certified free cash. So we would be able to meet the day after that rather than waiting for 2 weeks. So we're off cycle with our first and third from the way the council's meeting right now. So those are what we have on our agenda. So my first order is to open it up for public comments. And I did want to have a quick discussion on minutes also. So we are open for public comments. And when I look at the attendee list, we have no attendees. So I will look again at the end of the meeting just to re-ask about public comments in case people didn't see this. Notice, since we are meeting at 1 o'clock rather than 2, which if old timers would have remembered. So Sean, I think it's basically turning it over to you, and the first on the list are stabilization funds, the various places we have sequestered funds.
All right, so I thought this got sent out to everybody, but it did not. So I will make sure I distribute this to everybody. This is the section.
I sent it to
Oh,
everyone,
you did?
Sean.
Okay, I didn't see it in the packet, but I'm all right. Good. I'm glad they
Yeah,
got it.
Athena for some reason didn't post it.
Okay. So we have a policy on reserves that we've updated over the years, especially as the council has made certain decisions. So the general overview of our reserve policy is that we strive to set aside 5% of our operating budget in free cash. That's for sort of short term during the year emergencies or things that might pop up. I think there's one year where a bridge got damaged and the town needed to appropriate some quick funds to put up a temporary bridge, things like that that are sort of one time, not huge, and need urgent action that's outside of our regular budget. After 5% of free cash, the town has a general stabilization fund. Um, and real quick, on free cash, it requires a majority vote of the council to appropriate from free cash. Then we have general stabilization. And a few years ago, we updated our policy to basically say that we want to keep 10% of the operating budget in general stabilization. This is more for economic downturns, not necessarily like one-time capital needs or emergency needs. This is more for a prolonged economic downturn where we may need a source of revenue for, 2 to 3 years is really what it's supposed to reflect. Um, and so in order to put money into stabilization, it's a two-thirds vote. There was a change in the law. So if we have a general stabilization fund, in order to appropriate from a general stabilization fund, it's a two-thirds vote. If we have a special purpose stabilization fund, which is we have a couple of those. If we have a special purpose stabilization fund, then it's only a majority vote to appropriate. And that was a small nuance and a change that was made a couple of years ago. After our general stabilization fund, the town discussed, well, what do we do if we have money left beyond that? And we knew we had these large capital projects looming. So the town created a capital stabilization fund, which would be one of those special purpose stabilization funds. And so any reserves beyond the 5% for free cash and beyond the 10% for general stabilization go into our capital stabilization fund, except for a couple exceptions I will talk about in a second. And so we've built up that capital stabilization fund. At one time, our goal was to be able to fully pay for our fire station. As construction costs have risen rapidly in the last few years, there's only so much debt the town can take on and be you know be responsible. And so the option that we started pursuing is, could we set aside enough funds to essentially pay for the fire station? And good progress was made in a very short period of time. Um, but I know there's been some different conversations the last couple of years. I think we need to renew that sort of planning for all four projects at some point soon. I know we've got two of the projects started, but the fire station's still sort of hanging out there. So that's capital stabilization. Then the council decided that it wanted to basically build a reserve of up to $2 million for reparations. So we have a reparation stabilization fund, and whatever the town receives in cannabis revenue and cannabis excise tax revenue, that money goes into the following year. We transfer that money into the reparation stabilization fund. So, we'll talk about this later, but part of our surplus each year, there's some amounts in our surplus at the end of the year that are basically revenues we don't budget because we know they're going to get transferred to some other use. And that's an example of one that gets transferred every year. And then I think that, am I missing one, Kathy? I think that covers all of our stabilization funds and
Yeah,
our
I guess,
free cash.
the only one I wanted to, it's not called a stabilization fund, but the opioid money that
Mhm.
shows up in revenues for us
Yep.
goes into something called a revolving fund, but it's another one, well, you can describe it, it's another one that
Yeah.
doesn't fall into the general fund. Yeah.
Yeah, and that one's more required by law. So the town was part of a statewide, basically class action lawsuit against some of the opioid um, manufacturers. The state attorney general negotiated a settlement, so we will receive basically settlement funds every year for the next 15 to 20 years. There's a schedule, and so those funds we can there's an action that I can bring to the council at some point, which would essentially have those funds go directly into the revolving fund. We haven't done that yet. The state passed a law that allows us to do that. When these first started getting received, that law didn't exist. So they would come into the general fund as general fund revenue, go to free cash, and then we would basically appropriate them into the revolving fund. But yeah, those opioid settlement funds go into an opioid revolving fund, and then our health director is the primary person in charge of spending them in accordance with, you have to have an opioid mitigation plan that we submit to the state and so on. So there's a lot of rules around it, but that's where those funds go.
So on any questions and comments, and I see Sam's hand is up. And the other thing that was put into the packet is the current balances of these. But first, I think
Yeah.
just to understand how these funds work. Sam, then Jill, Counselor Brevick, and then Lynn. Sam.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Sean. Sean, can you just confirm for me? I want to make sure I heard correctly. You indicated for the General Stabilization Fund, there's a two-third vote requirement. Did I hear you say majority vote for free cash? Or was
Yeah,
it a
it's a majority
two-third
vote for
vote?
free cash to
Yeah.
appropriate. It's a two-thirds majority for the general stabilization
Okay.
fund,
Yes.
and it's a majority vote for a special purpose
Yeah.
stabilization fund.
Thank you.
And is the special purpose, just to make that clear, is that
That would be
the
capital
capital,
and,
that'd
and
be
the
capital.
reparations fund. Yep.
And that's, Sam, that's to take it out. You
Yes,
understood that. That's to take it
yeah.
out. Yeah.
Two-thirds for stabilization, five, majority for free cash and or
Special purpose.
special purpose.
Yep.
Jill,
Two questions. One, does there's like a special education stabilization fund, or maybe that's a
Y-
revolving fund. I'm
Yeah,
wondering how
that's kind of a unique fund. So that was created, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now. That's a unique fund. So that is more on the school side, but we do have some funds there. That one I'd have to pull up the rules because it is very unique. Where if the school committee decides they want to use it, they have to put in a request to the council, and the council would have to approve use of those funds. But we do have a special ed it is called a stabilization fund, but I don't know if it technically falls under this type of stabilization funds. But we do, I think last time we looked, I'll have to go see what our balances were. But there definitely is money in there for the elementary schools. I think there's a small amount in there for the regional schools. The regional
and that
schools maintain their own. They're not on our books.
and I know that one has a specific purpose where if like the number of students with special needs
Yeah, so that one's
exceeds
for
the
unanticipated special education
yeah.
needs. It's not necessarily meant to be like a funding source for things you know about. It's more if you have a student move in mid-year that you
Right.
you didn't plan for, that you have those funds available.
But do funds go into it from the surplus?
that,
Yeah, so once upon a time, I was the one that did it, but I can't remember exactly how we did it. But we put money in, I believe, when we had money left over at the end of the year in the elementary budget. We brought some action. Back then, we had town meeting, so there was something brought to town meeting for them to approve to put money into it.
and
It'd
The
and
probably
money
it'd, be-
went.
it'd be much easier nowadays with town council.
And Jill, in the guidelines, we have a footnote on the elementary one that money that was put in has accumulated just in earnings and it's never been drawn on. So that there was seed money, and I'm not sure how what the regional funding was, but when Region talked about it, it was similar. It's sat there and not been drawn on. So it's not that there's money being put in every year because they didn't have a target amount, since they haven't been using it. So I don't know,
And
but
the, and there's also limitations on that fund. There's a cap. I think it's 2% of net school spending. We're not there in terms of we haven't funded it to the maximum, but again, this is what makes it different than other stabilization funds. There's a maximum that they put on that fund, the state.
So
Lynn,
if we were to draw down on it, we would presumably put money back
Replenish it.
into it.
Yeah, I think that's what the budget guidelines actually say this year is that if any funds were going to be drawn down, that there would be action taken to replenish it.
And then just one other quick question on the process for spending out of the general stabilization fund. Are there guidelines around that? I mean, it sounds like from what you said, it's not something we do often and would only be in the case of a prolonged economic downturn. But are there like criteria of what qualifies for that and how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were considering using it when COVID hit. That was a time when there was a lot of uncertainty around state aid, and if we were to see a reduction in state aid, that would be a circumstance when we might consider using stabilization. The way it would like functionally work, depending on how the economic emergency hit us. If we knew about it in advance, it'd be part of the budget process, so it would be built into the budget process as a funding source. If it was something that happened mid-year, which has happened in the past, where the state has done something called 9C cuts, where they cut state aid middle of the year because of economic conditions, then we might need to do some sort of special appropriation. But I think generally it would be part of the budget process if we were to use it.
Lynn,
Let me follow on because I think this was an important part of the discussion during guidelines development, and that is when we use those funds, we should not be looking to them as a way to fund for the same student in the following years. Those funds should come from the regular budget. So it's really only there for a one-year use for those kinds of emergencies. But my question, Sean, was you mentioned a change in the vote quantum. Is
Mhm.
that a state decision?
Yeah, I can send it out. There was a Department of Revenue IGR guideline that came out that essentially lowered. It used to be two-thirds for all stabilization funds, but the theory was that if you took a two-thirds majority vote to create the stabilization fund in the first place, which is what it requires to create them, why do you have to then do a two-thirds majority vote to use it for that same purpose that you already created it
Mhm.
for? I think with general stabilization, there is no specified purpose, so that's why they didn't apply it to that. But yeah, I can send that IGR out.
Yeah. And I'd want to go back on the use of the general reserves for economic downturn. The last time I believe that the town had to use them was during the 2008 recession. And because in that year, the state in February recalled grants that were supposedly year-long grants, and they were 8 months into the grants, and they cut them off at only half price. My experience at that point was with the university. So obviously, we had to find the money to either cover personnel, lay them off, and also we had to cover 2 months that wasn't otherwise available. I mention this because one of the biggest concerns about the fiscal year that we're going into at the state level is the possibility of seeing 9C cuts again. And I hope we don't. It's brutal. I think the governor's been trying not to have that, but it's really, I mean, back in 2008, it was literally used to keep employees employed that was otherwise would have been laid off. So,
Jill,
Just a small clarifying question on the 10% in the general stabilization fund. Is it that we can't exceed 10% or
So
10,
when it
10% the
so every
minimum or the
year,
maximum?
yeah, so that's the target. So our goal is to have 10%. If we're below 10% and we have excess free cash beyond the 5% free cash, we would bring general stabilization up to 10%. If general stabilization gets over 10%, then we bring that difference to capital stabilization or appropriate it for capital needs, roads and um, so typically we do this in the fall, but it's a little bit later this year. We will bring a series of transfers to the council, and those transfers go through a lot of these reserves that we've talked about. So it's what is 5% of what is the new 5% number and that amount? What is the 10% number and what's that amount? How much money do we have above and beyond that? And what is the town manager proposing to use that for? Whether to put it into capital stabilization, appropriate it for roads, appropriate it for some other project. But every fall, roughly in winter, those orders are brought to the council. So you'll see them probably at your next meeting, I think.
and Jill, just so you know, those are our financial guidelines. So the current form of government, the council, we inherited those because they were set during town meeting and select board, but we looked at them and affirmed them, confirmed them. So there's not a state requirement of 10, and some towns are lower than that in their stabilization fund, but we have been aiming for that for all the reasons Lynn and Sean have said, that keeping at that level, we during COVID, we lost what is called the other retail revenue. We basically saw that go through the tubes in terms of restaurant and Mary's people weren't eating out because the restaurants weren't open. I mean, we saw a whole line of revenue disappear completely. People didn't buy new cars, so excise, everything was coming in low for us. But that's so when you just think it's not a fixed number given to us from some state rule. It's an internal policy. And Sean set up, under Sean and under the council, we set up the capital stabilization fund to start reserving money for the buildings we had coming down the road.
And the other two, real quick, just benefits of having those reserves. So one, right now, when interest rates are high, it benefits the town. So the interest earned on the general fund, on the free cash, becomes a general fund revenue source. The interest earned on the stabilization fund stays with the stabilization fund, but then can be transferred to capital and help with capital needs. So by having the reserves, it generates interest revenue. And then the other thing that we just did yes yesterday, we had our bond rating call for debt that's about to be issued. And the thing that has gotten Amherst to where we are and has got us to a double A plus credit rating. We want to go to triple A, but right now we're double A plus. Is our reserves. That's one of the things that is always noted as being in a position of strength for the town. And if our reserve percentage was to fall below a certain amount, it would potentially be a negative, or it would reverse some of the positive gains that we've built.
Lynn,
Dawn, do we also use reserves as float, if you will, for evening out borrowing times when we have to stay below a certain level? I'm thinking of your model for,
Yeah, I mean, not directly, but it helps with cash flow. I mean,
okay.
having the reserves helps with cash flow, especially right now when we have two big building projects
Right.
we have $5 to $7 million worth of invoices going out every month for those two projects. It makes the treasurer's job a little easier to have that extra cash flow.
anything else on reserves? And well, you were sent it all, and once we posted in the packet were the current balances. So we had a balance in the budget book. The balances were reported, and I think that balance was as of April 2005. So Sean gave us current balances. So one of the things you can see if you look backwards is what Sean just said. They're earning interest, so they're growing because of the base. Sam, you're muted, Sam.
Thank you, Kathy. Following up on Sean's comment regarding our bond rating, uh, popped into my head. Out of curiosity, what would be the impact of a change in the bond rating in terms of our borrowing costs?
Yeah, so I can't say a specific number. We do get reports every month from our financial advisor that all the clients they work with, the bonds they've issued, what their rates are, and what their rating is as a community. And the general rule of thumb is that the higher your rating is as a community, the better the interest rate is that you get. But I think it varies so much from issuance to issuance, and right now from month to month that it's hard to quantify. But I would think on average we would see higher interest rates if we were to not be a double A plus. And likewise, trying to get to a triple A, that we would get better rates if we were able to get there.
Do they like interpolate, or is it like eighth of a percent each time type?
Yeah, I mean, so the way interest rates are established, our banks bid on our debt.
Mhm.
So it's not, every time we go out to issue debt, we have competition. And so
Mhm.
it might be a time when there's not a lot of other debt being issued out there in the state, and banks are really aggressive, and they might, even if you are a lower rating, they might give you a really good rate, or it could be a different time. So that's why I can't really speak to it, because it's a competitive process. And
And,
I don't know what the banks do on their side when they look at the different levels of debt.
and, and as a last follow-up on that, what do you see happening with borrowing costs currently?
Um,
Bar
so
rates for new issuances.
yeah, the last time we spoke with our financial advisor, I think generally will be short-term rates will be trending downward. Um, those are the ones that are most impacted by Federal Reserve action, are the short-term rates. Longer-term rates are more a reflection of the economy, and those have trended downward a little bit, but those are less easy to predict what the long-term rates will look like. And that's what most of our debt is, we're working on now, is long-term.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the stabilization funds? Um, so next up is the ambulance fund.
All right, so the town has an ambulance fund, and the revenues that go into the ambulance fund are from a few different sources, primarily insurance proceeds. So when our um, EMS staff transport somebody to the hospital, they can bill insurance, either their private insurance or if they're on Medicaid or Medicare, we could bill those insurances and get money into that fund. So that's the biggest source. We also provide ambulance services to Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury. And so we have intermunicipal agreements with Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury, and they pay us about $35,000 to $40,000 a year each for those services. Then we also have strategic partnership agreements with University of Massachusetts and Amherst College. Both of those strategic partnership agreements have carve-outs for ambulance services. And so those revenues are also going into that fund. So for UMass, it's about $700,000 a year. For Amherst College, I'll have to double check, but it's, I think, $200,000 or $300,000 a year. But those funds are going into the ambulance fund. So all of these proceeds go into the ambulance fund, and then each year during the budget process, a portion of the balance is appropriated to support the overall operating budget and really is meant to sort of reflect, indirectly support the fire and EMS department of the town. The ambulance fund is a receipts reserved for appropriations fund, which is a very unique type of fund, which means we can't appropriate anything that's not already in the fund. So you have to have the balance. You can't appropriate based on anticipated revenues. You have to have the revenues in the fund before you can appropriate. So the balance that's in the ambulance fund might look a little bit larger, and part of the reason is we have to have the money in the fund before we can appropriate. The other reason for that balance is it's also used for capital. So when we need to buy an ambulance, or ambulance, other EMS equipment, stretchers, radios, different things that they use, the ambulance fund is a funding source for that. So, and the way that again happens is through the budget process, through the capital plan. You'll see in the other financing sources section of the budget under revenue, you'll see a line for ambulance fund. That's how much is being pulled out of the ambulance fund. And then depending whether it's operating or capital, on the expense side, the operating cost would be in the town budget. The capital cost would be down in the capital section. But they basically are a wash, what comes in. And questions?
So I saw Tom's hand go up and down, but right now Tom doesn't seem to be there. So I have a question, Sean, it looked like it's the fund balance now is around 5 million in terms of what you sent us. Do we try to keep it at that level, or do we knowingly get a lot lower than that in the year we have to buy, like we bought a ladder truck, we bought a couple of ambulances.
Yeah.
So
this wouldn't be for fire. It can't be used for fire
so
equipment.
It can only be used for the ambulance.
Yeah, only for the ambulance side. No, I think one thing, and there's going to be a plan as part of the budget process brought to the council. I think we're going to look at our ambulance funds. We've done a few things in the last couple of years. One, those strategic partnership agreements have gone into effect, and those generated more money for ambulance services than we were receiving previously. And two, we've been looking at our rates and making sure that our rates are competitive with the state and with our neighbors. We use a billing company called Comstar. They do all the billing for us, and they have clients throughout the state. So we're able to get really good information from them on how our rates compare to other communities' rates. So one of the things that we're going to do as part of the budget process and ultimately be part of the budget is look at how much we're bringing in ambulance revenues, how much we're using to support the budget. The goal of the council through the budget guidelines to look at staffing levels for the EMS and fire department, and see if there's anything that can be done with that ambulance fund. So no, not forecasting anything, but that will be part of that process this year.
So would that mean when we're buying an ambulance that we can usually buy it in cash rather than debt finance it?
Yes, yeah, we generally don't borrow for ambulances, and part of that reason is because we have the ambulance fund. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Tom, I saw your hand went up and then down. I didn't know whether that was, we moved too fast off of specialization, but I didn't
Well,
mean to.
Sean, yeah, thank you. Sean did answer the question. Sean answered the question that I was going to raise, which was about whether it was restricted just to operating outlays or to capital expenditures. And we got to that. So my question's answered. Thanks.
Anything else on these topics? You know, and I want to thank everyone for raising them. Ambulance fund, I just knew it existed, so it was a really good explanation of both money in, money out, and level. So next, I think is budget meeting calendar in general, is as I'm remembering the next piece. And then in that mix is the update, the mid-February update. And Anna, you had asked to have a discussion. We would normally be starting the focus discussions with schools and with departments in May. We have, since I've been on the council, the one exception was a partial exception, is we had done the assessment method and the capital side of the region earlier than May, but we did the operating side in the context of the whole operating budget. So we did them all together in May. So on it, you know, whichever order, because we have the Sean update too, it affects our calendar, the finance committee's calendar, as well as the town. So Anna.
Absolutely. And I am focusing on the operating budget piece of this, not the capital budget piece. So I want to take the two separately. Right now, like Kathy said, we hear from departments in May. This is after the town manager has built his budget using the town council's financial guidelines. I believe that it would be more beneficial to hear from departments about their operating budgets in November. November is when we have held our public forums on the budget and we get input from the public about how to build those budget guidelines. In my mind, it makes sense to hear from those departments at the same time as we're creating the guidelines. If there are specific questions about a budget that come up after, we could ask Paul to ask the department to come speak with us in May. But since the council can only reduce budget items, I'm gonna focus on the operation, the municipal side, not the school piece. But since the council can only reduce and cannot increase and cannot move around line items within a budget, we are hearing from departments, but they're not bringing us line items with the intent that we reduce them, because Paul gives us a balanced budget. So we're not typically looking to cut. If Paul stopped bringing us a balanced budget, those conversations with staff would be really different, because we would be looking at every single department saying, what do we need to take away? Personally, I'm glad he doesn't do that. If we keep it in May, we need to have a frank discussion about what the purpose of those meetings is. It's really great to hear from staff, but to what end? We're not looking at specific line items and saying we're going to cut XYZ, we're going to remove XYZ, which is the only thing that we're allowed to do by law to those budgets. We have much more latitude as we're creating our budget guidelines. So if we're meeting with these departments to understand how they work and what their needs are, it makes sense to meet with them in November so that that information can inform our budget guidelines that we write. If we're looking at line items to reduce, then May makes sense. But I wanted to have the conversation because when I sat on finance before, felt like the May meetings were a really great opportunity to learn more about the departments, but were not effective in terms of informing our discussions about the budget. They would have informed our conversations about the guidelines much more effectively.
So I just want to give everyone a chance to weigh in on this before I say anything. So any hands? So Anna, just in terms of clarifying, we are in February now, so November was several months ago.
I
You know,
understand.
so this we actually had this discussion with a potential November-ish, and because of vacancies in the finance department, we didn't pursue it, you know, this past calendar year. So are you thinking of looking forward to November, FY, November this year at 2026 is my question.
There's no clean way to do this without having 1 year where we either have nothing or double. I would rather hear from the departments this year and have that be the last time that we hear from them in May, and then start hearing from them in November, because
Okay.
the council hasn't heard from them yet. So I think that if we switch to May, it should be this coming May.
Okay, thank you.
November, sorry.
Okay, thank you. That certainly makes things easier. And just so everyone knows, if you go back and look at it, it's the really big apartments, as opposed to one-person departments that matter a lot because there's a lot of staffing in them, there's a lot of costs, and hearing about staff turnover or staff vacancies or stresses is in several different, so you're talking about thinking in terms of planning with town staff. How would we do that in a way that would make sense for us in the fall?
And if we talk, and again, it's really to inform the budget guidelines, but,
Okay.
and Sean, I'm happy to hear any and all arguments if you agree or disagree from the perspective of staff, but I think that would be helpful to know kind of whether or not you think that they would find it a better use of their time or a worse use of their time or something altogether different or a neutral.
I mean, I think we'd have to really rethink some of our internal processes. Um, so right now, staff work on their individual budgets, they work on staffing levels. There's kind of a cram right now to get things done in order to be ready to have, to review those with the council. If you were to do these in November, um,
Be too late.
well, it'd be a different conversation, right? You wouldn't be looking at actual budgets like you do in May. You'd be more hearing about maybe the accomplishments and the goals of each department, and maybe there could be some service level data that would be available at that point. But you wouldn't be looking at um, proposed budgets which I think is the point. So we definitely have to do some rethinking on our side. I like that I hear you're not saying to have them come twice necessarily, because I think that would be challenging to not just this committee because those are, it's pretty intense that month when you're meeting for so many hours to review every department. To do that twice regularly would be challenging. But no, we would just have to rethink our process. And I think the council would have to be really clear what information it was looking for, and how the process that usually happens in May, would just not happen, or I guess would look a lot different. So we'd have to think about it.
Anna.
Yeah, I guess to follow up, when I recall back to, and again, it was a couple years ago at this point, hearing from staff in May, we had the budget book, like we could look at those individual or those budgets, but the presentation part was more of what you were saying they would give us in November. It was kind of an overview of how the department functioned and all of that. Because again, the purpose of there's the purpose of those, which is to familiarize us with the budget. But then the reality of it is also what we can do as a result of that action. And the only thing we can do is cut. So it feels, I guess I'm curious kind of what the staff understand the purpose of those meetings to be and what their ideal outcome is. If it's not, I need to prove that they shouldn't cut anything from my budget because we don't because they typically have had balanced budgets. So I'm struggling with that part of it to figure out what the purpose is if we're not
Yeah.
cutting.
I think for some departments, I have heard this. I think for some departments, it is the one opportunity a year that departments have to really come and
Right.
speak directly to, because a lot of times those finance committee meetings are attended by all counselors, and it's the chance they come to have to really speak about their budget and their goals and priorities. Some of that could happen in November, as part of that revised process. But I think a lot of it's about being able to speak directly to the council, explain their budget, explain what they do. Because a lot of times, especially smaller departments, don't get as much attention necessarily, and it makes sense. But that is the one opportunity where all departments get to come and speak directly to council.
Okay, I'm seeing Sam, then Jill, in terms of the order the hands went up. And Sam, good, you unmuted.
Thank you, Kathy. Sean, I'm wondering, in thinking about it on his comment, is there benefit or uh, more more knowledgeable input based on a longer stretch of time, November, uh, for the fiscal year? In other words, is a January time period, is there more info that departments might have what might change in that time period if you delay it a bit? Not
Yeah,
necessarily May, but
yeah. I think
is
if you
there
go
a
too
sweet
late,
spot in there where there's greater
yeah.
predictability or awareness of what might change over those months?
So if you go too late, then I think it's too late for budget guidelines, right? Because budget guidelines, the school department really starts working on their budget earlier than December, but really December, November. So I think the more you push it back, the less helpful it is for developing budget guidelines. I think the other thing that popped in my head, and this again would be for the finance committee, one of the key pieces that the finance committee provides the council is with a report to council on the budget. And I would say most of the content for that report, and Kathy and Lynn, you've written some of these in the past, come from those hearings in May. Um, so if you weren't to have those hearings in May, what would that report look like? It could be, you could still do it. It would just probably look different because it wouldn't be as much at the department level. It might be higher level, conversations with Paul and myself and superintendent and library director.
Jill, and then Lynn.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the schools piece of this, Anna. So you were saying that you're primarily talking about the municipal budget and hearing from municipal department heads. How does the school piece, and forgive me if this is an obvious question, but how does the school piece then fit in with this process?
Is that to me or to Sean? I was
To
just adding
you,
that.
well, either, just wondering if you shift this timeline for hearing from municipal department heads, would you also sh need to shift the schools piece as well?
Well, but the schools, Jill, you should remember the schools are having this discussion in open public meetings because of the school committee. It's so to the extent we want to hear what's going on within those we hear. We don't hear anything about DPW, about fire and police until we hit May. We literally nothing. We have only, as Sean said, we have the report we wrote based on what we got in the budget book. So we are, whether the information is useful, and we are all, as counselors, entitled to send questions in to those meetings, in terms of asking questions for the school committee to be getting out on the budget. So there's much more knowledge about those budgets pre the budget book than there is about the municipal budgets. That's all I want to say, where it's helpful or not, but we have very little knowledge until May from hearing from people.
Kathy, can I add to that real quick?
Yeah.
And I think you probably would still want the schools and the library to come
Yeah.
in May or earlier
Oh,
once they
yeah.
vote their budget to speak to it. Where, if you think about the way our budget's organized, Paul and myself, we work directly with departments to develop the town portion, which includes all the fire and police, all of them. But the school budget is built completely by the school staff and is approved by the school committee, and the library budget's built by the library director and approved by the library trustees. And so I think you would still want those once those budgets are voted, those for each of those groups, you'd still want them to come and explain what's in their budget and what caused increases, decreases, so on.
Yeah,
Because Paul
I
and I
wasn't
wouldn't be able
saying,
to speak to it as well.
no, I wasn't saying not do it in May, but
Yeah, yeah, and
the
I hear you.
question of the earlier, um, because similarly within the school budget, within the we have some really big town departments and some smaller town departments. Similarly, the school has big areas and small areas. We don't get in to the sub areas, and the overall school budget is the whole school budget rather than every department has a certain target. But in the town, departments have targets to make the whole thing work. So just and that's where we get to see it when in May, on their share of the budget. So Lynn, and then Anna, I'm sorry to jump in as chair. Lynn?
That's fine. So one of the things that I have found very interesting about Anna's request, and that is I'm going to reflect back when the council first started over 7 years ago now. We actually had a meeting for all counselors with every department so that we got an overview of what the department, particularly the big departments. But it took us a couple extra nights, and uh, those meetings were very informative and laid a groundwork for the counselors that came in 7 years ago to have a better understanding of the full breadth of town council, of the town's operation. I think we've tried to mimic that a little bit, but we've never done anything at that level in the past. So one of the things I'm hearing is just in general, when we do the budget, it's the one time that we kind of look at what a department does, and we hear a little bit about their needs, and we get to ask questions and have a direct meeting with a department head. The question that this raises for me is, give me an example or two or three. I mean, I'm sure there are one of what would change in the guidelines if we had those meetings earlier. Okay. And that, because I think that's where, for example, and I'll just say this year, one of the things that came out during the fire on Olympia Place was perhaps we are understaffed on fire. Okay. And that led to a um, guideline in the budget guidelines about placing some priority on that over a multi-year period to fill it in. And that some of that came because of what we were hearing from the public, some came from what we were hearing from the union, and some of it clearly came from the town manager communicating what we learned out of that fire. So it's, and those are the kinds of things that have led to guidelines and specific guidelines. And is that the kind of thing you're looking for? And at what point, so that's one question. At what point are we, frankly, stepping over the line of management of the town versus governance of the town? And I want to make sure that we think of those two issues. I'm fully for understanding more about our departments and for doing budget guidelines that are as helpful as possible. So I think we have a missing piece here that the first council was privy to, and we've just not done as good a job for subsequent councils.
Anna.
So I think, I mean, personally, I love the idea of a meet and greet. That sounds great. And as I looked back through some of the old finance committee packets, as I was thinking about this, I was looking at the questions that the finance committee asks these departments. And I've got a couple examples that are, there are certainly some aspects that are targeted towards budgetary amounts, but most of them, I would argue from, and again, I didn't do an exhaustive search, so forgive me if I'm a little off, but I would argue that most of the questions asked are bigger picture strategic issues or concerns that would be just as effective when asked, in fact, more effective when asked in November, because they bring up issues that could be addressed in budget guidelines. So for example, they talked about in the policing, in the meeting with APD, the question was, your calls have dropped and there's a drop in officers responding. A large share appears to be mainly community policing. Please explain the change. That's not a budget dollar question. That is not relating to what was put in the budget book about their direct line items. That relates to what was put in the budget book about their staffing. Another example was with DPW, long range objective of implementing the next phase of DPW headquarters, as recommended by the feasibility study. Does this mean the department's unwilling to consider alternatives to the recommendation? Again, those are bigger picture questions. It's beyond just a meet and greet, in my opinion. We would still need that information from departments about, and I think that this committee would need to think very carefully and strategically about what questions we're asking the departments to come prepped for, or what information we're asking them to provide to us to then come up with questions about. But I think that if we can really focus up, and if we have specific budget questions in May, those don't require weekly May meetings. Those could require sending our questions via email. And if we need them to come in, we can ask for that. But I think, Lynn, it goes beyond just that meet and greet and an opportunity to really talk with them about the strategic priorities. And I see what you're saying about in terms of the overreaching question. I think we would need to be really very aware of where those boundaries lie, and we are should only be asking questions to inform our own budget guidelines. That should be the focus. It shouldn't just be an opportunity to critique, oh, the way a department runs. It's about what are the questions that we need to ask that allow us to build budget guidelines that support the biggest needs of our staff in the town. So I see it a bit more focused, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I have a suggestion, since I think maybe we've come to an end, a circle on this. Having heard this, Sean and Paul, since Paul seems to be, at least his pictures with us, maybe you could come back and propose what might work from your perspective and the way you work with it. And I'm wondering whether November is too late and whether it might be October. And what, putting the boundaries around it. Because actually it came up at the Amherst College quick breakfast in a 1-minute conversation I had with Paul on, we tend to do things at a small town level where regional might be more efficient. And I've never understood with dispatching, with ambulance, with a bunch of things, why every town has a ladder truck, why, you're just trying to think of the efficiency level that's long-term budget on it's not each year, but I've never been sure of, are we losing the most skilled people, and is it because our salary scale is wrong? And we were supposed to do a salary compare. So it might be if you could frame what might not be disruptive in terms of the general process, but might be useful. And when the timing of it, maybe you could come back to us with what might work. Having heard the kinds of things that people potential, and these would be the big departments. Or you could say it just doesn't work, but you could come back and with what might be possible.
Can I clarify, Anna, is the intent that it would only be for the big departments, or are you envisioning all departments?
I'm kind of stuck on that question, honestly. I think that it would be most beneficial for the big departments, but I mean, I think we have heard from small departments in the past. Like Stephanie has come and she's a
Yeah,
department of one, right? Like
yeah.
I don't, so I think because our budget guidelines do often impact. Stephanie and climate action is the easiest one to pull because those often are brought into our budget guidelines. So I think it could any any of this is at Paul's discretion, right? In terms of we cannot command people to come to us, but I think if he thinks it would be beneficial and if it is often referenced in our budget guidelines, that could make sense. But
Yeah, and so I'll talk with Paul, and we can bring something back at the next meeting. I think the thing I think about is how would budget guidelines look different under this model from where they are currently, and it could, there are pros and cons. My worry is always that the budget guidelines become so specific that they're no longer guidelines, and I don't know how we would. And I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but that would be one worry I would have would be, if you meet with every department and you try to have a guideline for every department, then at some point it's so specific that it's really hard to craft a budget. So that would be, we don't have to answer that now, but I think that's part of the thought we have to give to it is how would we keep it at the guideline level? But I understand your point of wanting to hear from departments earlier when crafting them, so you reflect all departments, not just kind of the higher level.
well, and I think there's also not for nothing, the council then creates the town manager goals right after the guidelines. And so there are a lot of things that you're absolutely right are too small to be in goal and guidelines, but it could be more appropriate for goals. And so Kathy gave kind of a really great example of exploring regionalization of services. That's something that I could argue goes in either or both of those places, depending on what makes sense. So I
Okay.
think that there's another place if it's too kind of nitpicky for the guidelines, but it's something that the council ultimately needs to discuss and vote on as a specific item. It could get bumped to the goals.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk about Opal and we'll have something for the next meeting.
Okay, so thank you. And the next meeting, well, depending on whether the Community Preservation Act gets to the council and also gets on our schedule, the next meeting may be fairly packed. But anyway, I will talk with Sean about what is likely to hit us. So that gets us to the mid-February update. What you're thinking about, Sean, and for those. I think everyone knows, but when the governor, I thought about it last night, when the governor puts out her budget, we get preliminary cherry sheet numbers for Amherst. So I went and looked at the numbers. Um, and it's basically nothing more for the schools. The town has some ups and downs in it. And I was just going through lines, Sean, you've probably done it more than I have, but uh, it, it wasn't generous, the first budget pass of the governor for municipal. Um, So in any case, I know that was one of the things you were waiting for and
Yeah.
you had already been
Yep.
conservative on a couple of the lines, so.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact date of when what meeting we'll have it, but we will be updating our budget projections. We have the Hampshire County retirement number that wasn't factored into the initial projections, and that came in favorably. We have the state, as you mentioned, the cherry sheets. One thing that came in pretty favorably, it's kind of, you can't always tell just by looking at the surface of it, but our PVTA assessment dropped quite a bit.
Dropped a lot,
And
yeah.
and we looked into that and sounds like we were a little skeptical of it because we haven't typically seen a
Mhm.
drop in our assessment, but apparently other member communities of PVTA are increasing at a greater rate than we are, and so our portion has shrunk. Um, Hopefully, it's not a short-term blip, but that was an unexpected positive development that will reflect in our numbers. So, and then health insurance figures are coming in. Um, the came in better than that won't necessarily affect our projections. That's really within each department's operating budget, but hopefully some of the numbers you've heard, both our numbers in the town in terms of how it impact our budget, and you've heard numbers from the schools and the library, um, will be better. The impact of health insurance won't be nearly as great as it could have been under our original assumptions. So yes, we will update those numbers. We'll also look at our local receipts again. I know that was a priority for this committee. We'll look at our local receipts with 6 months of data and see how we feel about the numbers that we have budgeted for FY27. So all that'll be rolled into our next round, which we're working on now, almost done with it now. So it's really just timing.
Okay. I have a question of two others, but Lynn, go on. I have two other line items, but Lynn, I'll call on you first.
Um, yes, Paul shared with us what I think is amazing news about our healthcare last night. And it does seem to me that um, that's it's good news. I'd be curious to know how much we think in general that change brings to the town and also to the schools.
Yeah. So um, for us, our budget, every 1% lower premium increase is somewhere around $30,000. So, it's a pretty
Okay.
significant, for the schools, it's probably even greater because their health insurance numbers are higher, or they have a bigger budget between the region and the elementary school. Um, so I haven't done the exact math of it, but it'll be a positive impact for sure. A
Mhm.
very positive impact.
Yeah. But what you're saying is that initially it won't lead to a budget increase on the guidelines.
Yeah, it doesn't impact directly the numbers you see on the high level budget projections because health insurance is in a separate line there. It's broken up within the regional assessment and it's within the
Mhm, mhm.
elementary school budget, within the library budget. So what it allows is, and again, this isn't finalized, but the initial 3.5% that was projected for an increase to each of those operating budgets, that 3.5% now less of that has to go to cover health insurance increases that are
Right.
within those budgets. So that,
Right.
for the schools and where we've seen what the gaps are, those gaps will improve.
Okay. One of the things that I know Kathy has pushed for on a number of occasions, and I just want to add to the push bluntly, and that is this whole issue of where the health insurance are and the other benefits rates are for which group, and making sure that we can at least have an estimate. And I know that's difficult because different groups are bigger users of healthcare and so forth and so on. But if we were writing a grant proposal, we would put in the number of people and then we would put in a line for healthcare or a line for other benefits. And what would that number be in terms of an average per person? And I just know that when I worked with the university and therefore the Commonwealth, we would get a number that we would have to then use for the next year or so. And the same thing would be true for travel. So, and it may not be an exact number because some people don't take with certain plans or whatever, but it was close enough and done on an average basis that it worked. And so I'd like to figure out how we can assess more accurately what the insurance cost is by group.
When you say, can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say by group, do you mean town, school, library, or do you mean fire,
Within
police?
Within
fire,
departments, and
Yeah.
also, for instance, in the town budget, there's a piece of the schools that people don't think it belongs to the schools, but the fact is we're paying it for the schools, okay? And
that's in the
so,
pension side. Yep.
yeah, on the pension side. And it's trying to,
Yeah, but it's also not coming out of the town budget either. So I think with health insurance, it's pretty consistent. Every operating budget pays for their own health insurance, and it's based on the employees of those systems, right? With retirement, all all of it's pulled out, except for enterprise funds, which pay their retirement. Other than them, the full retirement assessment doesn't live in any of the operating budgets. The region is different. Again, the region is a completely separate legal entity, but the library, the elementary schools, and the town, the retirement assessment is pulled out in a separate line. We could definitely give you estimates. I mean, the hard part is we have departments of one, and we don't typically say whether
right,
they we wouldn't give you actuals. We could
and
come up
absolutely, because
with an
that's,
average. I think it'd be purely for informational purposes, because we have a line for health insurance and our employee benefits, and it would be really um, logistically challenging to budget that by department level. But we could, for informational purposes, and we kind of do this, we have some internal sheets where we do this a little bit, kind of allocate a percentage of that health insurance to different departments. So we could share that information out at different times throughout the year.
and I thank you. And I totally agree with you. You cannot do anything that exposes a personnel issue by stating, for instance, this department of one has this amount of health insurance or whatever the case may be, because that's because we know that who works there and then therefore what's their health coverage, and that's not our business. But you could clump them together, all departments that are five and under people or something get clumped as a unit or something that helps us look a little bit more about the individual costs of healthcare across departments and then across the total. So,
And
Yeah.
and Sean, I looked back. For some reason, I have pre-council a finance committee report, and there was a very last page that just did the markup. So what Lynn is saying is, are we at a point it's a 50% markup? Whatever you see in the personnel line. And the only place, for those of you who haven't looked at the only place you can see something like that is in our enterprise funds. You can see that this much is personnel and this much is benefits, but it's that rough, what Lynn says, a rough average that one or the other might be. The pension's a bit easier because it's a prorated, but even that you don't want it at the individual. So it's just that factor. So when we add a staff person, we're not just adding their salary. We're adding, if it's an FTE, we're adding X percent more. I think that's all we're looking for.
Sure. Yeah, we can definitely provide that.
So I have two questions on your updates. One is in the guidelines, we gave you a range on capital. which was 10% to 10.5. So JCPC is meeting next week, so we'll find out what you're using. So just on when you put this together, it matters because that's what then remains for the operating budget. So I don't know what you're planning on doing and there's clearly something in between 10 and 10.5. So I'm just saying we left it as a range. And then the other question is you mentioned local receipts, but our 6-month interest earnings are running really high. And although you increase the estimate for interest earnings, in the projections, so that was the other line item that the 6-month told us in addition to local receipts. So it's just a question on one line item, and then what in the budget are you thinking in the update? And even if you just said 10% would be this and 10.5 would be however you're doing, those were my two questions.
Yeah. So we probably won't look at the preliminary FY27 capital plan until the following meeting. So I think next week we will be reviewing last year's plan to bring the committee up to speed with what was approved last year and the process, and then agreeing to a schedule for meeting. And then it would likely be the following meeting that we would bring the preliminary capital plan. Paul hasn't reviewed and approved anything at this point, even at the preliminary stage. So I don't want to share anything at this point. On the interest investment income, I was on a meeting just before this one with some other finance directors in Western Mass. I think many communities are dealing with the same thing we're dealing with, which is high investment income, pressure to raise those budgets, and a reluctance to raise those budgets because of the nature of where those revenues are coming from. So, I think that's an area where I'm going to be really, I mean, ultimately, the council and the town manager will make those decisions, but I'm really reluctant to increase anywhere near what we're seeing for actuals with investment income. I looked at the numbers earlier today, and I can share what I was looking at, which is, where is it? Here it is. So for interest and investment income in particular, from FY19 to FY23, we averaged $300,000 a year. From FY24 and FY25, we averaged 2.2 million. So there's been clearly a very short-term increase to investment income that coincides with some of our construction projects. And the problem is if we build an operating budget that relies on those $2 million figures that we've seen the last couple of years, and then it goes back down to the 300, that's going to wipe out, it's going to really create a cliff for us in the future. So I think we've bumped up the investment income a little bit, reflecting that interest rates are higher, but they're, if the Federal Reserve pushes interest rates down in the future, that will impact those revenues for us. So I think that's one area where we're really, really cautious, because it does stand out, and I get that it stands out, but it's sort of the short-term phenomenon, which is for us a little bit. And another community actually mentioned this. Another community also has a building project going on, so their numbers are a little bit inflated as well for investment income. So that's one area, and then the other one that I know has been higher than typical in the past is building permits, building permit revenue. That's one that we've looked at. And I looked at those numbers over the last 6 years. So from FY19 to FY25, we've had 3 down years and 3 up years. Our 3 down years, we saw building permit revenues fall by 39%, 17%, and 34%. In our 3 up years, we've seen permit revenues increase by 73%, 6%, and 87%. So all that is to say is that's why we're so cautious in budgeting building permit revenues, because they are very volatile. There's been sharp decreases and sharp increases, and that's not saying we're not going to look at the average and increase it a little bit when we build our projections. But I think when folks look at the surplus, like, it's hard to explain that piece, that it's such a volatile number that's dependent on what is being built that particular year. New growth is another one where we had several years of good new growth, and then this year, it didn't hit its target by 20% or 30%. So So yes, I hear you about the investment income, and I think that one in particular is the one I'm most concerned about because it is the largest piece that's been contributing to our surplus, and it's the piece that seems like the most sort of the biggest anomaly that could go away in the next year or two.
And I'm going to call on you, Sam, but just to follow up on that, I think what you just gave us in information would be good to give it to us and again when we see that, because that is, we heard some of that, of course, from Melissa, who was doing that, but that notion of why we're so high,
Yeah,
and not to expect it to continue. So, one of the issues I know is we borrowed early for the school.
and there were
And then,
delays.
and then we
Yep,
had a delay on the bidding
yep.
process that was not under our control. So it, a big pot of money was earning interest while waiting to start spending it. So we've spent it all now, but we gained a while. And then as long as we keep our free cash, and then we had beyond our control equipment purchases, which were major. So we sequestered it and they were earning interest as well,
Right.
so Sam.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Sean. Maybe I'm just inquiring to state the obvious, or I just want to confirm. Am I correct that you're indicating, Sean, that the reason the interest income was so high is that essentially we had money parked for big projects and we gained interest on those, and that money's going to get spent, and therefore we can't assume we're going to get those same returns in the future?
That's part of it. Yeah. So part of it is interest rates used to be, less than 1%, and now they're 4% for a certificate of deposit. So part of it is interest rates have actually shifted up in the last several years. And then a big piece of it as well is what you described, which is we have additional funds on hand for the library project or for the, more for the school project in this case. And for a while, we had ARPA money where, we had additional ARPA funds on hand. So we've seen investment income boost up because of these funds that we've had. That once we do spend it, and we're right now with the elementary school, we're getting $4 or $5 million invoices every month now because they're really in the heading towards the finish line. So yeah, we won't anticipate having that money on hand to generate quite such a large investment return in the future.
Thank you. Your posture seems wise.
Sam, you have your hand up, so go ahead.
I think that was the end of
Oh,
his
okay.
comment. You're on.
So, Sean, I would assume it's only with the library that we may have received state funds that we would then hold and earn interest on, not from MSBA.
Yeah, so
Uh,
MSBA is reimbursement, so we don't get those funds in advance.
right,
MBLC, they give us the funds in advance, but the interest has to stay with the
right,
MBLC. So
okay.
that doesn't actually go into our general fund
And so when you give
interest.
us those figures, you're already subtracting out
Yeah, that's
interest
free
on that money.
cash. That's fun. All of our revolving funds, the ambulance fund. Yeah, well, not even the ambulance fund. The interest stays in there. Um, any fund that required by law, the interest stays with that fund. We have an allocation to put the interest in those funds. So it's really our funds that are unrestricted that generates that revenue.
Right. And thank you. I think that's fine. Thanks.
Any other questions on this? Was all revolving around to the February. We next meet on well, that's the next thing on the thing. Are people comfortable with shifting our next meeting from the 17th to the 24th? So by that time, Sean, do you anticipate we'd be getting this update?
Yeah, so ultimately it'll come down to what Paul wants to do, but I know the plan is to have the financial orders for that date, um, possibly an update on the middle school roof and what's going to happen with the middle school roof. Um, and then if, assuming Paul approves it, but possibly a change here too. So I think that'll require more conversation between Paul and
Okay.
the council.
Anna.
I'm okay with, I'm trying to pull up my calendar now. I am okay with it, but I would just ask that given the second that we change a FinCom meeting to either the week before or the week after it's supposed to be, we're then doubling up for those of us who are on GOL. So I'll just ask that as much as we can minimize that, we do. But I understand why this would be necessary.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. You know, in the past, when I said the past meeting, the year before last, finance always met the day after the council. So you never knew, it wasn't like first and third or whatever. We met as often during the month as the council did, if not more often. So I hadn't even looked at council schedule when we said first and third. So it was even more confusing before because you couldn't count on when we were meeting. And we were doing that so that if a financial order came to us, we had time as a committee to get it back rather than with the whole committee being able to read it as the finance committee before the report went. Because otherwise, meeting on Tuesday and getting a report in 2 days before the agenda meant we had to turn reports around really fast. So that had always been what we had done. And then I realized for the first time in February, what we did is we put us out of cycle. So we were going to be meeting so much later after these financial orders. So I think you're right. We'll have to be careful about it. But I think this time it warrants it because the council's not meeting every other week because of the school vacation. You know, I mean, it's one of those months that the council isn't every other Monday. So if that's the case, you know, Athena, I think, has updated the agenda to, you know, our meeting schedule. Otherwise, what we agreed on is at some point we'd figure out in May, if we're meeting a second time, what day of the week and what time of the week. We don't have to decide that right now, you know, if we're meeting twice a week. And Athena is putting, this is in the packet for, so the February, except it should be 24th. I just put that's the count, that's okay. That was, I put the wrong, Mandy's eyes caught it. We're not meeting the same day as the council. So that's the only thing that's changed. And then I guess Athena did some other changes through here on first and third. So Athena, maybe you can.
Yeah, these were just the wrong dates were in here for first and third weeks. And then I moved the January meeting a little bit later so that once the council reconvenes in the new year, there's time for the president to assign committee members. Because if you were meeting that first Tuesday in January, there you might not have members yet.
So this is after she makes that one change, this is the revised. It should be in our packet, and then you can just download it for everyone to put it into their calendar. So basically the only thing that changed is that February date until you get to September, where I guess the days were wrong there.
Right.
So that's meeting schedule. Any questions on that? So you all got the report because I sent it to you that we received from the regional school regarding the middle school roof, the middle school auditorium roof. And we're going to be waiting to hear for your purpose, Tom, to hear whether if we're not on the timeline that was written in that memo before we even think about it, could it be added as an add alt for either a full replacement or a repair? I was asked a question of can they just fix it for a while rather than the full 1.6? But we're not going to be seeing anything like that until at a minimum we get the full cash flow with a road thing where we're looking at it in the context of everything else. So we won't be seeing anything soon, you know, like next week. Sean.
Yeah, I spoke with Shannon, the school business manager, and so my understanding is they are adding it as a add alternate for at least the replacement. I don't, and they've got to get this out pretty soon. I don't know that they've put a repair option, but that they're putting the replacement as an alternate. And based on the timeline that was sent over in the memo, we essentially need to they need to know about funding before they award the contract, which was like the middle of March. I think March 18th was when they opened bids. So they really need to know whether the funding's in place before they award any contracts.
Okay, and so we'll get that information in writing, I assume, when the council meets. Anna.
Um, this is tangential to that. I think something that has stuck out to me in this process has been the way that MSBA has ruled this out initially because it's 1 year away from being 25 years old and not taking into account the condition of the roof. And so I'm wondering if at some point it would make sense for the town council and the school committee to jointly author a letter to MSBA just explaining the impact of that rule on our community. And I don't know if that's something that I'm happy to kind of take a stab at that or whatever makes sense, but I do think that it's important that the MSBA group know that limitation has really impacted us. And I think that Paul, you had said that the rule changed recently too, like it continues to change. So it's hard to kind of stay on top of it. Sean, I don't know if you got any more info.
Holyoke would probably co-sign that letter with you because when I was there, Holyoke, they have more schools, and so we would have 2 or 3 MSBA projects going on at any time, covering multiple schools. And there was a project where one courtyard of windows was done at a later time than the rest of the windows. And so we were able to replace all the other windows, but we couldn't replace just that courtyard. We had to go back and request that courtyard later. And they had a similar situation with this a roof there where part of the roof was replaced at a different time. So I think Holyoke would co-sign any letter you write to the MSBA.
So I'm happy, Kathy, if you'd like, I'm happy to kind of take a first stab at that. And then I don't know if it should come from FinCom to the council for Mandy to kind of be as the deputized head of the council, and then we can take it to the school committee. But I'm reflecting on our meeting last night where coalition building is important. And, I think that this is one that's worth passing on. But I just wanted to clarify that the message should be, MSBA should be looking at efficiency of scaling, right? And kind of how to do that best. And then also look at the quality of the structure, not just a randomly assigned age duration. Does those 2 main points?
That makes a lot of sense, Anna.
Okay. All right. I'm happy to draft something up hopefully for our next meeting, Kathy, if you want to discuss this again.
So before we adjourn, I just want to say a quick word about minutes. We don't have any minutes, Athena, I don't think, to review at least I didn't see them in the packet.
No, I don't have any.
So what we have done for the past couple years, to the extent we have minutes, is we get to see the minutes, and then we've assigned someone to review the minutes and make any corrections, and basically not taken finance committee time to go over the minutes, and then given everyone the ability, if they read the minutes, to want to change them. And what we did in 2025 is I reviewed all the minutes, but we still don't have any minutes from June through December. So I had a fairly easy job because I only had a half year. Bob Hegner did the minutes for 2024, and Andy did the minutes for 2023, although I split them. So when we have minutes, we were trying to make a less time-consuming. It's similar to the way the council does it, although the council always is voting the minutes, also having assumed they read it, that someone else has reviewed them rather than what you see in school committee and a couple other committees is they take time for everyone to comment on the minutes. So if people are comfortable with that, we could propose a process next time, and it could be the vice chair and the chair split them, and we do them every other time that we take it on that. And with Zoom, it's an easy review. And if we make the minutes shorter and just pick up the major part, it doesn't put a lot of burden on people. So that was rather than having the minutes on the agenda. And we instituted this early on, then we stopped it, and then we had a backlog of about 10 or 12 minutes that nobody had reviewed because we had no time to review them. So they just sat there. So I'll bring it back up, but it's not something we have to decide on right now because we don't have any minutes to review. So yeah, Lynn.
I want to urge a couple things in the efficiency of town council business and the issue of minutes and committee reports. and that is, and I'll bring this up to GOL, which is where it really belongs, but since we're talking about minutes, let's talk about this. Um, it seems redundant to me that we have both a committee report and minutes. And if in putting together the minutes that were approved last night for the last four towns meeting, in the space of about a half an hour, I mimicked the minutes that we had approved the week, earlier on, I think it was our first January meeting, which were, less complicated, but included votes. What it did not include was the flavor of the discussion, if you will. And so one of my questions is, can we explore a way in which minutes, if done on time, can in fact become the report of the committee? Because basically what we have is two sets of records of the meeting. That's number one. It's an efficiency issue. The second one is, I know that when we have our recordings, we can look at the recording, and we usually have those within less than 24 hours. And we can look at the recording, and that can help us write reports. I don't know, Kathy, whether you've used that in your own work or not, but is it legal for us to use AI note taker? And I'd like to know if that's a legal issue or not.
But can you, just as a quick response, we do not do a written report for every time we meet at finance. We've only particularly when we're doing this, a review of how funds are used and things like this. So we have not done that. So that shifts it, who's having to write it. So I would, if GOL can look at, to the extent we are doing a report in the week we're doing, can we forgo minutes? My understanding is we're required by mass law to do minutes. And they don't have to be as detailed as we've had them. They're supposed to keep the substance of the discussion. And so discuss this, discuss that is all that's needed. But if you can find out, because the backlog on minutes could disappear pretty quickly for finance, we could get up to date if they could be super abbreviated on what was discussed. And if the report that when we did it, like all the budget in May, we do one major budget report. At the end of those meetings, we're not doing it after each of the meetings. So it would be great if GOL could find out a way to make the whole process, not to get us this big backlog, and that would be great.
My question really was not to eliminate minutes, but to eliminate the written reports. I think that on the other hand, Kathy, I will just say that from a counselor standpoint, the finance committee reports have been extremely helpful. JCPC report, as you've pointed out, is also one report. And you've done that and so forth. So I just want to make sure that when I'm trying to
I understand
way
what you're
for us to be more efficient, get our minutes done, and not have it be such an individual burden to each committee and to our clerk. So,
and just my quick reaction on reports. For the most part, our reports have more in them than you would ever get from minutes, because it's people put edits. We've added some footnotes, we've added some tables. So the reports are more than a quick AI. But you're right. If AI summarized, it might be easier to do the report. But yeah, and that's why one of the things we've done with the review back and forth, several of you suggested edits to what I did on capturing the questions we asked on repair, on what's the state of the roof, and they were really useful. And we hadn't necessarily covered every one of those pieces, electrical, for example. So, but yes, anything that would save us time would be great. Tom, and then Anna.
Just a quick contribution here on terms of minutes and reports. The organization I'm in, and AI, to your question, Lynn, I'm in an organization that's in a fairly regulated space, which is financial and investment, and then the preceding one likely. And in both cases, what we were compelled to file minutes. We generally wanted to have minutes be accurate but fairly lean. And what we would do is to start with a more detailed write-up, and then which we would keep for records, and then strip it down to what needed to be in the public record or the state files, so that it was accurate and complete, but not as what did you use? Colorful or flavorful. So I think AI would be a good start. In my experience, and maybe yours too. It's still going to need to be reviewed. We have a good 20th century review process that I think works well. For instance, on those recent memos. Although Kathy, I always have great sympathy for the time you must spend collating our feedback. AI would give us a boost. There will be incorrect mistakes that have to be corrected, and that's going to involve people spending time on it. It's not going to take that time away. I don't know if the town or other municipalities have a policy on use of AI, but this service that we're on today does offer it. That's all.
Anna.
So I'm not going to get into the merits of AI or not. I think that what I will say is our council rules of procedure, which outline the policies around report writing, do not specify who needs to write the report. It just says committees shall report to the council as needed. And any recommendation for action must be submitted in writing for inclusion in the council packet. And then it specifies what those reports should include. And so I think that this could be a matter that GOL takes up in discussion of the rules and how they're written. But just to clarify that point, I think that this is that's definitely a rules discussion, and the rules currently do not state, I don't believe, unless I'm missing something, that the chair must be the one who types out every word of that report. Just that it has to go in and as needed is also a pretty vague phrase.
Yeah. Sam.
Thank you. It seems to me, well, from other committees and bodies that I've been on, minute taking can be burdensome for those who have to recreate them after the fact, let alone committee reports. Anything that would ease that burden seems to be worth looking into. That's my assumption, not having written any town council minutes. I did it for the CPA committee, and there was always, depending on who was doing it, challenges. We rotated, and sometimes they wouldn't be done for 6 months. And anything that would make it more efficient seems to be desirable given the breadth of committees that exist in the town, let alone the work burden that I assume for committee chairs and others.
Okay, so we'll leave it right now. We don't have any minutes to review, so we don't have to spend time on our agenda reviewing them. And I just want people to know that for whatever reason, it's maybe because of what I did before I ran for council. The reports don't take me very long to write. I take really good notes, and my notes are annotated notes rather than AI notes on what were people really trying to get at. And the very long report finance has been doing after the May budget is we have all split it up. So whoever took schools for their section reports wrote the draft, whoever took fire and police and safety. So it wasn't one person. And the chair's role was to pull it into one document with an executive summary that if you didn't want to read a long document, you could read the short. And AI does a terrible job on that. If you want really high highlights. And so from my perspective, the reports have not been burdensome because we only do them when we need to do them. What's been a question mark is how far can we get away with no minutes whatsoever? So is there some efficient way of just generating minutes? And I leave that to Athena, who's been in charge of our minute takers, and GOL. We've already simplified the council minutes a lot, and I think that's all we're looking for.
Yep, that'll be the plan going forward at this point. I don't support a plan to eliminate our human minute takers in favor of using AI. I don't think AI produces quality minutes anyway. So I'll have an update for the committee about approval of minutes at their next meeting after I meet with my minute takers.
And I am going to move to adjourn, but my husband is trying to do written transcripts off of tapes of his father speaking, and his father has a slight German accent. So when his father said the word Berlin, it came out as Boston. And there was so he spent hours and hours fixing the interpretation of what it was, which was supposed to be. So that was the intelligence didn't quite translate to picking up how people talk. Jill.
Yeah, sorry, just before we adjourn, I just had a question on strategy that came into my mind last night when hearing from I think it was the CRC that talked about their plans to work on the solar bylaw for the year. And like, this is going to be our thing that we'll be all kind of working and collaborating on for the year. Is that something that this committee has done in the past, setting some strategic goals or, things that we want to work on together in the year? And just wondering what people think about that.
No, I'll react just quickly. And so what I haven't had a chance to do, because basically Sean's been busy, we're driven a lot by financial orders that come to us. So we could scope out other than May, the times on when we'll be doing what, and certainly we could. The Finance Committee is charged with reviewing financial orders. We can request financial, if you look at our charge, in the charter, we can request financial information from departments, from schools, from anybody. So in terms of thinking more generally, Anna's suggestion of we meet earlier with some departments would be a different strategy than what we've done before, but we've been driven a lot. So different years, we've been really crunched for time for how much is flowing with us. Pam for CRC was able to report on CRC just spent an entire year on a draft of solar. So what she's got right now is trying to get it over the hurdle. And what she didn't have is any proposal on zoning will be going. She doesn't have that yet in an agenda at all. She doesn't know what's coming to her. So she was able to report on that one piece. So it's something Sean and I can come on what likely he has a better idea of what's flowing to us. So we've got an audit report. We've got certain things that we have to do as a finance committee. And so we can give a roughly when these things might happen, Jill. And that would, I think, provide a context that would be helpful.
Yeah, no, and I understand we have a different type of charge, but I mean, even as things as simple as, we want to be better at transparency and, sharing.
Well, the one big
like
one that
guiding kind of goals.
well,
Not to get into it now, but yeah.
Well, one of the big ones that what came out of charter is the budget book itself. And Sean will I mean, he came up with the original design, but is there a way to make it both less time consuming for staff to do, but also more transparent on what are we missing? There's some tables I keep not finding when I go look for them. So everyone taking a look from that, we could have a focused discussion on that or just different people's views. And if we get it in sooner rather than later, it might help staff. So it's that kind of thing that would require people really thinking of what am I looking at and what don't I have on transparency? Because most of the budget information that we have is posted. We're pretty transparent on budget information, but ambulance fund was one. I didn't know where to find it, on a where is it, how big it is. Some of the others are easier to find. So coming up with that, Jill, on if people have what is it, because it's usually the town itself, what's on our website, how to find it, or in a report, how to find it, um, is what people are looking for, even on quarterly reports. Where do I look for this? What's the detail underneath the report that what I can't see? So they're different pieces of it. So I think getting more specific would be useful, and we could have a focused time on those issues.
Yeah, and I don't mean to bring that up as a thing to discuss right now, but if other people have other things that they're thinking about strategically for the year, I think it might be good to just have us all kind of hear from each other and for me to learn if there were things that other folks were working on
And if
previously.
there are any things like that, so I took notes on this. If anyone has those others, just send it to me, just to me. But so I can sit down with Sean on when does he think what's going to be flowing to us. And if people want, I can also send everyone who doesn't already know where to cherry sheet. They can look at what the governor's marks were for the town of Amherst generally and the regional school. So those are out right now. What the governor and when they come out, they show you the current year and the FY27, so you can see whether it's an increase or a decrease. And I'll just send everyone the links to where to find that. Anything else? If not, I still have no attendees, so there won't be public comments. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
And I will put it to a quick vote. Lynn?
Aye.
Kathy is a yes. Anna?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Councillor Brevick?
Yes.
That's unanimous. We're adjourned. And thank you very much, Sean, for getting all of
Thank
this
you.
to us.
Thanks, Athena.